I have probably replaced 3,000 cracked screens in the last 5 years. You see a lot of personal things when you fix phones for a living, but you train yourself to look right past them. You're a mechanic for glass and silicon. You don't look at the photos. You don't read the texts. You just fix the hardware and you ignore the software. That is the unspoken rule. But I kept one phone. It's sitting at the bottom of a steel lockbox in my bedroom closet right now, completely disconnected from any power source. And yet, sometimes, in the dead of night, I swear I can hear it vibrating. I run a tiny electronics repair shop tucked between a dry cleaner and a vacant storefront. There's not much to look at. It always smells faintly of burnt rosin flux and old dust, and the fluorescent lights hum with this low, constant buzz. It's quiet, predictable work. That changed on a Tuesday in late November. It was raining hard, the kind of heavy, freezing downpour that completely clears the streets. I was wiping down my workbench, about 10 minutes from locking up, when the bell above the door chimed. A man walked in. He looked to be in his late 50s, wearing an expensive camel-colored wool coat that was completely soaked through. He wasn't carrying an umbrella. He just stood by the door for a second, catching his breath, looking over his shoulder at the empty street before stepping up to the counter. He didn't say hello. He reached into his wet coat, pulled out a smartphone, and slid it across the glass display case. "I need the memory pulled off this board," he said. His voice was quiet, but it had this slight, uneven tremor to it. He was shivering, but I don't think it was from the cold. I looked down at the device. It was an older model, a few generations behind, but the damage was what caught my eye. This wasn't a drop from a balcony or a car running over it. The center of the screen was caved in. The metal chassis bent backward into a sharp V shape. It looked like someone had put it on a concrete floor and brought a ball-peen hammer down on it, over and over again. "Look, man," I said, gently pushing it back toward him. "The logic board is probably snapped in half. Even if I get in there, the memory chip is likely." "Please," he interrupted. He placed a hand flat on the glass counter to steady it. I noticed his fingernails were bitten down to the quick. "Just try. I don't care about the screen. I don't care about the battery. Just make the board boot up. That's all." He reached into his other pocket and dropped a thick, folded stack of bills next to the ruined phone. Mostly hundreds. It had to be at least $2,000. "I need it tonight," he said, not breaking eye contact. "And whatever you do not connect it to a Wi-Fi network." Before I could ask for a name or write out a service ticket, he turned and walked back out into the rain. I stood there in the quiet shop for a long time. The money was just sitting there. It was more than I made in a month. I told myself he was probably just a guy going through a messy divorce. People do crazy things when they're desperate. I locked the front door, pulled the metal security grate down, and took the phone to my workbench. Curiosity is a funny thing. It doesn't hit you all at once. It creeps in through small inconsistencies. I put the phone on my heating mat to soften the adhesive. Using my pry tool, I carefully peeled away the shattered back glass. To my absolute surprise, the logic board was perfectly intact. The hammer blows had completely pulverized the battery and the camera array, but they had miraculously missed the central processor and the storage module by mere millimeters. I spent the next hour carefully extracting the board. I plugged it into a fresh, temporary display assembly from my inventory and attached a test bench battery. I held my breath, took my tweezers, and shorted the power pins to mimic a power button press. The screen flickered. A backlight kicked on. I sat back, letting out a breath I didn't know I was holding. It was booting up, but as the screen fully powered on, that feeling of relief vanished into a strange, creeping unease. There was no manufacturer logo, no carrier animation. The screen was just pure, blinding white. There was no clock, no background image, no prompt asking for a pin or a fingerprint. Just a blank, white void. I stared at it. For a guy paranoid enough to physically destroy his phone, having absolutely zero lock screen security made no sense. I tentatively swiped up. The screen transitioned instantly. The home screen was just as empty. No apps, no widgets, no dock at the bottom. The only thing on the screen was a single, generic icon right in the dead center. A calculator. I shifted in my chair. The shop suddenly felt too quiet. The hum of the lights above me seemed louder than before. I tapped the calculator app. A standard number pad appeared. I pressed a few buttons, 5, 6, 2. Nothing happened. No numbers showed up in the display area. It wasn't doing math. It was a blind entry pad. I should have stopped there. I should have disconnected the battery, put the board in an anti-static bag, and waited for the man to come back. But then I noticed the top right corner of the screen. The Wi-Fi icon was grayed out, just like he had asked. But the battery icon was showing a very specific number, 11%. I looked at the physical battery I had connected to the board. It was a brand new test unit plugged directly into my bench supply. It should have been reading 100%. 11. I looked back at the blank calculator pad. My finger hovered over the glass. I tapped 1, and then 1. The screen instantly went pitch black. For a second, I thought the motherboard had finally shorted out. But then, a line of plain white text appeared at the top left corner, scrolling down like an old computer terminal. Local directory accessed. Decryption key accepted. The text vanished, replaced by a very basic gray file manager. No flashy graphics, just 3 folders: ledger, collateral, insurance. My throat felt dry. I reached for my mouse, my hand trembling slightly, and clicked on the first folder, ledger. It opened a spreadsheet. It was a list of names, dates, and dollar amounts. But the names, I recognized them. The mayor's chief of staff, a prominent local judge, the owner of the biggest construction firm in the state. Next to the judge's name, there was a date from 2 years ago, a transfer amount of $500,000, and a small, cryptic note. Vegas, hotel footage secured. Next to the construction owner, zoning payoff, audio confirmed. This wasn't a personal phone. It was an archive, a digital vault of blackmail. The man who brought it in wasn't trying to hide his own secrets. He was managing the secrets of the most powerful people in the city. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. I backed out of the spreadsheet. My instincts were screaming at me to pull the plug, but my hand moved on its own, clicking the second folder. Collateral, photos and audio files. I clicked a photo at random. It was taken from a distance, maybe from a parked car. It showed a woman putting groceries into a minivan. She looked tired, ordinary, but the crosshairs of a digital zoom were centered perfectly on her face. I clicked another. A teenage boy walking out of a high school, laughing with his friends, completely unaware he was being photographed from across the street. Another. A man sitting in his living room watching TV, recorded through the gap in his own curtains. These weren't just files. This was the raw human cost used to keep those powerful people in line. Wives, children, private, quiet moments stolen and weaponized. My chest tightened. I could hear my own pulse thumping in my ears, heavy and rhythmic, competing with the sound of the rain outside. I needed to cut the power. I reached for the battery connector on the bench. But as my hand moved, my elbow brushed the computer mouse, inadvertently double-clicking the third folder. Insurance. There was only one file inside. An audio recording. Date stamped today. Exactly 3 hours ago. I stared at the play icon. The logical part of my brain was begging me to shut the whole system down. But my hand hovered over the mouse. I clicked play. There was static at first. Then the muffled hum of a car engine running. "You have the drive?" a voice asked. It was deep, calm, almost bored. "I have it," a second voice answered. It was the man from my shop. His voice was ragged, thick with panic. "I'm going to destroy it. I swear to God. I'm smashing it to pieces. You don't have to do this." "We can't just take your word for it, Arthur," the calm voice replied. "Flash memory is incredibly resilient. We need to know if the encryption was breached before you panicked." "I didn't look. I swear I didn't." "Then prove it. Smash the hardware. Make it look desperate. And then take it to a third party. Someone quiet. Someone who won't ask questions." Silence on the recording. just the rhythmic thump-thump of windshield wipers. Then, the calm voice spoke again, and my blood ran completely cold. "There's a small repair shop on 4th and Elm," the voice said. "The technician works alone. Drops the shutters at 8 p.m. Take it there. Pay him whatever he asks. If he fixes it and hands it back without looking, you live. If he gets curious, the software will ping the network the second he inputs the battery percentage. And we'll know." The recording stopped. I stopped breathing. I slowly shifted my eyes from the center of the screen up to the top right corner. The Wi-Fi icon. I hadn't connected the board to my shop's router. The man had specifically told me not to use Wi-Fi, but I didn't check for an internal eSIM hidden under the motherboard's thermal shield. Right next to the battery icon, 3 tiny bars of 5G service were glowing a bright, solid white. It was a trap. Arthur hadn't brought the phone to me to recover his data. He brought it to me to see if I was the kind of person who would look. I was the test. And the moment I typed 11 into that blank calculator, the phone had silently reached out to the cellular network and sent a flare. They knew the phone was on. They knew it was unlocked. They knew I was looking. I snatched my tweezers and violently yanked the battery cable from the board. The screen died instantly, plunging my workbench back into the dim, yellow glow of my desk lamp. I sat there paralyzed. Call the police? The judge on that ledger probably signed their warrants. Run? They had my address. They knew exactly where I was sitting. I glanced at the clock on the wall. It was 11:45 p.m. Then, over the steady, heavy drum of the rain, I heard it. Footsteps on the wet pavement outside my shop. Slow, deliberate, heavy steps. They stopped right in front of my glass door. I reached up and clicked off my desk lamp. The shop went completely black, lit only by the faint, orange glow of the street lamp filtering through the closed blinds. I slid off my stool and crouched behind the display counter, hugging my knees to my chest. I held my breath until my lungs burned. I watched the dark silhouette of a person standing on the other side of the frosted glass. They didn't knock. They didn't test the door handle. They just stood there perfectly still. Seconds stretched into agonizing minutes. The silence was suffocating. Then, the brass mail slot at the bottom of the door groaned open with a metallic squeak. Something small was pushed through. It hit the floor mat with a soft, plastic click. The slot snapped shut. The silhouette turned, and the footsteps slowly faded away into the rain. I didn't move for a long time. My legs were cramping, and my hands were shaking so badly that when I finally crawled to the front door, I could barely pick up the object on the mat. It was a sleek, black USB flash drive. Wrapped tightly around it was a piece of masking tape with a single word written in neat, black ink. Insurance. I sat on the cold floor in the dark, the realization slowly washing over me. Arthur. He knew his handlers were going to kill him regardless. He knew the phone was a death sentence for whoever opened it. But he also knew that if I found the files, I would need a way out. He hadn't just handed me his death sentence. He had given me a copy of the very leverage that got him killed. I didn't open the shop the next day. I put the salvaged motherboard in an anti-static bag and locked it inside a heavy steel firebox. I hid the USB drive inside the lining of my winter coat in the closet. 2 days later, the morning news anchor reported a tragic, fatal car accident on the highway. A local accountant named Arthur had lost control of his vehicle in the heavy rain. No foul play suspected. It's been 6 months since that night. I still go to work. I still replace cracked screens and swap out swollen batteries. The judge is still on the bench. The mayor's chief of staff is still on TV. No one ever came back to the shop looking for the phone. No one ever asked for the $2,000 back. Everything looks exactly the same as it did before. But I know the truth now. I know the fragile, invisible threads holding this city together. I have the drive. I have the names. I have the collateral. Sometimes, late at night, when the shop is completely empty and the fluorescent lights are humming, I wonder who is really in control. The powerful people on that list? Or the quiet, invisible technician who fixes their broken things? I never reconnected a battery to that motherboard. I swear I didn't. The firebox has been locked and shoved in the back of my bedroom closet for half a year. But last night, around 2 a.m., while I was sitting in my living room trying to read a book, I heard it, coming from behind the closed closet door. A faint, muffled vibration. Just a single, short buzz. I haven't opened the closet door yet. And honestly, I don't think I ever will.